Well, I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I grew up in a large family. So I was the 11th of the 12 children. So I was kind of distant between the other children of the family. And when I was growing up, I really didn't know them well because they were pretty much grown. I loved having big sisters because they gave us everything in the world, and they would pay us for anything we did. So I loved it. I loved having big sisters, and I still think of that often. I didn't know them well, though, growing up. As I got older, I came to know them better. So I was never really close to any particular one in the family because of where I was. There were 2.5 years ahead of me, one sister, and the other one, the baby, was 4 years behind me. And then in growing up, I went to public school 2 years and private school the rest of my life. In high school, grade school, high school, college, and then I started going to the public universities. I loved social life. One of my teachers wrote and said that my social activities were interfering with my academic life. But I still kept up with it. I loved studying. I loved reading books. I loved writing. But I loved everything social. I always had a lot of friends and went out a lot. So that was pretty much growing up, and I always enjoyed learning anything. And anybody I met, I could always learn from them. I don't care who they were, old, young, whatever race. I was very interested in everything and loved learning, which I still do today. And that's why I studied so much in different areas. And one thing I knew about myself later in life was I realized that all of my education were in the sciences and the math, and I said, I am not creative. I need to end up going into another subject area where I'm more creative, because I'm too oriented, like math and science, too much like this. Well, I ended up in theology, and the first thing Father said is, this is a science, and I thought, oh God, not again. So I never could escape the sciences and the math. So that's why I am today. I think I lack a lot of creativity. I'm beginning to discover cooking, which would probably be the only creativity in my life, because I love doing things like that and trying different things out. And the same in writing. I like to write a lot. But other people in my family were very artistic, and I never was. I realized at a very early age, and I was in public school the first and second grades. So I don't know which year it was, but we had a teacher that asked, what do you want to be when you get older and when you grow up? And I said, well, I want to be a nun. And of course, I was in a public school, and I guess most of the children were non-Catholic, because in Shreveport, it's the Bible Belt, and we have very few Catholics in Shreveport. And all the children said, what's a nun? And I remembered the teacher saying, it's like a nurse or a teacher. And I thought, you know, that's really not right. As little as I was, I knew the answer was wrong. And I was kind of put out, but I could not articulate it at that time. So I don't remember ever seeing a sister. I must have. I'm sure I went to catechism when I was in the first grade or second grade. I don't remember which year it was that I told the teacher that. But somehow God had his way, and I knew that at that early age. And of course, during life, you know, as you're growing up and going into puberty and dating and all of that, you forget, but always in the back of my mind, I always wanted to be a sister, always. And I never lost sight of that goal. Now, I traded in between. I wanted to be a Carmelite, total silence, And then I wanted to be a missionary and a martyr. You know, I went in between that, and I ended up being a teacher, which I never even thought of wanting to be. So that was my story of being my religious vocation. Well, my father was dead by the time, he died when I was about 14 or 15, so he wasn't alive. But I do remember telling him what I wanted to be, and he said it didn't make him any difference, just be a good one, you know. And I remember telling my mother, I stayed home from school to tell her that I was going to enter the convent. And I stayed home that day, and I said, you know, I'm not sick. She said, I know you're not. What is it? I said, I wanted to tell you something. And of course, the first thing she said was, are you pregnant? I said, oh my gosh, you know, I want to enter the convent. She said, who talked you into that? I said, nobody talked me. I said, I thought you always knew I wanted to enter the convent. She said, no. She said, I had an older sister in the convent. She said, she must have talked you into it. I said, no, I've never talked with her about that. I said, just thought everybody always knew I wanted to be a sister. She did not talk to me. She remained in silence for, over a week or so. She wouldn't talk with me at all. It was very difficult for me to take. And I remember going to talk with one of the Jesuits about it. And I said, I don't know what to do. I said, you know, I stayed home from work until from school. And so he said, well, you have to do what you believe God is calling you to do. And I said, well, I have to enter the convent. So I thought about it a lot, and my compromise was to work a while. It wasn't very long because I got out of school, I guess what would ordinarily be a junior year. I had all my credits I needed. So my senior year, I did not go back to school because I didn't need any more credits. So I worked for a while. I worked at some of the places in Shreveport as a secretary. So that was my way of maybe compromising and making my mother a little bit happy. So when I was going to enter and set the date and all, she said, I'll never come see you. But of course, that was over. You know, I mean, she did come. But it was very difficult for her to take. She said, no, you're supposed to get married. And I said, no, you let my other sister enter before me. She said, but you're different. You're not like her. And I said, well, but this is what I want to be. And then my older sisters, you know, put in their 2 cents, and they kept saying, well, you really shouldn't do this. I said, look, you did what you wanted to do in your life. I'm going to do what I want to do in my life. And so they never bothered me anymore. And they were much older than I. And I think the oldest was like 15 years older than I. And then all the others were about a year behind. They were very close. The first, I guess, 9 in the family were very close. And the last 3 of us were farther apart. So that was it, very difficult for my mother to take that. I think that I really was inspired a lot. I read the lives of the saints. I love to read, and I think I had read the life of every saint there was, a book was written about. So I was very much influenced, particularly by Teresa of Avila. I loved that life, and then of course I think education. I love studying, and I would always read and study all kinds of things, but I think my greatest influence in my life was probably the sisters who taught me, although I don't remember any particular one, but I think it was pretty much the lives of the saints that really affected me. I entered the Daughters of the Cross. They taught me in Shreveport, and as I said, Shreveport was I think it was 1% Catholic, probably still is right now. So I entered that order, and they were teachers. So I was a teacher. I mean, I started learning to, teach or go into education and administration. And then as I went on through the teaching and so forth of them, our community was never 100. It was a very small community from France. And we were mostly American at that time. And then in 1968, this was right after Vatican II, we were maybe about 89 or 90. We literally lost half of our congregation. They all left our order. It was all the young ones, everybody who was a postulant, a novice, a young profess. Even the sisters who were training them left because they said we were not up to date, we were not modern enough. They wanted different changes in our schedule. And my own sister was one of those who left with that group. So literally we lost all the young ones. And I don't think we ever got anybody after that. If they came, they didn't stay. They left. So that there we were, and we got down to about only 16 in the order. Well, most of the sisters were elderly. I think there were only about 3 or 4 of us who were under maybe 60. And so at that time, I was in administration of the order, and I said, we need to do something. We have to look around. We must merge with another order, or I think the church gives you 3 options. Either you go home, you can go to another community, or your order can merge with another order. And so we talked about it. We did a lot of studies for quite a few years. And then we got a canon lawyer, and she worked with us. And our decision was to merge with another order. Well, I was not in Shreveport at the time. I was in Texas. So the other sisters began to look at the orders. And the canon lawyer said, you must get a community who has the same background. In other words, same place in Europe or same country in Europe. And not only the same country, but the ministry. Do you have the same common ministries? What about the culture? Now, some of those questions I'd never thought about. So they looked around at the orders in Louisiana, and the order they found that most matched our order was the Marianites of Holy Cross. I did not know the Marianites at all, but all the other Daughters of the Cross knew them and really liked them. So we went around and we interviewed, or they interviewed us, I should say, about entering or joining their orders. I was very impressed with the Marianites. We looked at other orders, but they were the ones I was most impressed with because they were, even though they had elderly sisters, they were still very energized. They continued to work. They were full of zeal still. They were very prayerful, and they were very loving and compassionate. Of course, part of that South Louisiana probably, but I was really impressed with them. So when we went to vote, we chose the Marianites of Holy Cross. They were also teachers. They had the same background as we did, French. And the funny thing about that, after we joined them, we found out, that the very same date, 200 years earlier, the Daughters of the Cross were found. August the 4th, 1641. The Marianites were founded August the 4th, 1841. That was such a coincidence to me. Of course, they had more ministries because they had nurses and doctors. We had 1 nurse, I think, but we were so small compared to the Marianites. So when it came time to leave, half of the Daughters of the Cross decided they didn't want to leave. They were going to stay in Shreveport. So 7 of us transferred to the Marianites. And then for the Daughters of the Cross, so many of them died right away. Today, there's only 1 living. And it's interesting that she came this year to live in our nursing home that the Marianites own in Opelousas, Louisiana. Well, I've done so much in religious life. It's been such a journey for me, I guess you might say. I started out as a teacher, and grade school first, right out of the novitiate. Then they moved me to high school. I taught in high school quite a few, about, I'd say 14 years in all. Then I became an administrator during that time. For about 14 years, I was in high school administration. And then, in my training, my background always was after 5 years, you really ought to leave a position because you've used all your ideas, and so let somebody else take over. So I asked to be replaced as principal. They asked me to stay 1 more year, so I did, until they found someone. Then after that, I said, well, how would you like to stay here and teach under this principal? I said, well, that would be fine with me. And the superior said, well, she doesn't want it at all. She doesn't want you to stay here. I said, well, that's okay. So you should go off and study, go get your doctorate. So I was sent off to the University of Dallas to study theology of all things, which they wanted me to go into philosophy, which I love philosophy. And I said, well, what would I do with that? But anyway, I went. And then that's where I stayed for the next 33, 35 years of my life was in Dallas, Texas. Who would have ever believed that? So I go and I study there, and I travel a lot. I could not find a convent to live in. They were all full. So we had a former student of ours said, why don't you live with me and my husband? We only have one child left. He's grown, he's in college. All the others are gone. So I said, well, I don't know if I could do that, but they'd let me stay with that family. And I said, only if we could pay you. And she said, oh no. I said, well, if we can't pay you, I don't want to stay. So she said, well, I'll just give the money away. I said, what you do with your money is not our business, but that's yours. So I moved in, stayed with the family, and it took some adjusting. First of all, the times of religious life are so scheduled, so structured. Prayers at this time, dinner at this time. And it was very difficult because we always ate about 5:30 or 5 in the convent. And at the family home, sometimes we'd eat at 7, sometimes at 8. Oh, it was very difficult to adjust. But anyway, I did. And then they started having grandchildren, and those children would come to my room first thing when they hit the house. And I was trying to study, and I said, I can't study. And the grandmother said, just don't let them come in. I said, no, because that's all they would ever think about a sister, how mean she is. So I said, if you're good, you can come in. And they thought being good was asking me questions. I still couldn't study. But anyway, I had to adjust to that too. So they became my grandchildren in a way. They had 9 grandchildren, and every one of them I knew from, except 3 before they were born until they're grown today. So it was pretty difficult to adjust. Then after that, the Southern Association came in and questioned the doctoral program in theology. And so the university decided they were not going to keep it open. They blamed the library, but it really wasn't the library. I think the teachers were all really from Europe, and their teaching style was very different from American style. So they had to close their program down. And at that point, they found out that I had a degree in finance and economics. And so they asked me to stay on and work for the university. I was on their board, and of all things, I monitored stocks and bonds. So that's what I did for 2 years, and then I thought, I don't want to do stocks and bonds the rest of my life, So I told them I had to leave because we were going to have an election that year. And I thought we would have a change of Mother Generals, and that would give her a chance to put me wherever she wanted. So I resigned from that position, and then she was reelected, and there I was without a job. So anyway, I traveled. I went to Rome because I was accepted by the Jesuit Gregorian school there to finish my theology. So I went to Rome and visited there, but I decided I didn't want to stay because I'd already had these Europeans teaching me at the University of Dallas, and I found out that they were not so interested in Americans, in particular an American woman in theology over there. And I don't think they were crazy about Americans either, because they said the first thing Americans wanted to do was change things, and that we weren't going to have weekends off. And, so I thought, I don't want to stay here. I'm not going to put up with this. So I came back to America, and I went up to Catholic University, and my dream was to be a canon lawyer. That's what my theology degree was supposed to be in, because I wanted to help religious women. And when I was interviewed by this sister at Catholic University, she said, we don't need any more canon lawyers, but we need people in finance. Stick to that area. And I said, okay. So then I just forgot about the theology. Then I went back in, and I was asked to be on one of the boards for all religious women in the United States. It's called the LCWR. So I was that 2 years, and then after that Mother Teresa comes into the picture. These people this lady had gone up and asked Mother Teresa to come to Dallas. And she said, what for? She said, we need someone to take care of abused women. There's no one. So Mother Teresa said, where is Dallas? Well, that tickled the people in Dallas. They said, you should have said north of Houston, because Mother at that time had brothers in Houston, Texas. So she promised the lady she would send her sisters to Dallas. So the lady comes back and tells the bishop, and I said, you're supposed to ask the bishop first. She said, why? I said, well, no sister can come into a diocese without the bishop's permission. So anyway, she called the bishop, and he was ecstatic. He had tried to get Mother Teresa and her sisters, and she said, well, just put your name on a list. So anyway, so they come 2 years later, she does come to Dallas to visit. And I had to pick her up at the airport. The lady said she was too nervous to drive her. Could I drive her and pick her up? Well, we picked Mother up it was about midnight. And it was wonderful. I had already met her, though, in '76 in Chicago. I had always, admired the woman. And I remember, now I'm going to go back just a little bit to my first meeting with Mother Teresa. I was at a meeting for a religious, and I saw this big limousine drive up. And there was another sister with me. I don't know who she was. We were both going to the same meeting. And the limousine drove up, and I said, oh, that's Mother Teresa. And she said, oh, that's the cardinal from Rome. So it was funny because we were both looking at the same car. I saw Mother Teresa, but she saw the cardinal, not Mother Teresa. So I walk up to the limousine, and I talk to Mother Teresa, and I walk her into the building. And there were photographers all around, and they said, do you belong to her order? And I said, do I look like it? Because every one of her sisters is dressed like her. Anyway, so I asked the photographer, did he work for the newspaper? He said, why? I said, I want my picture taken with her. He said, I'll get you later on, which he did later on. He got the picture. But it was wonderful meeting her then. And when I came back home from the Chicago meeting, the sisters said, oh, she must have been kind of proud and all, because she had gotten just about every honor at that time except the Nobel Peace Prize. And I said, no, she is so simple. And that was a quality I found in her again in Dallas. She was so simple. When she came to Dallas, and we picked her up at the airport and drove her to the Carmelite monastery, because her assistant said she's been at San Quentin all day on death row. And of course, they were 2 hours ahead of us, behind us. So she'd been up, a pretty long time. Anyway, we picked her up, took her to the Carmelites. Well, don't you know the first thing the prioress asked at the Carmelites is, Mother, will you give us a talk at 5 in the morning? Which kind of defeated the purpose of being with the Carmelites, because we didn't want anyone to bother her. Well, anyway, so we woke her up, bless her heart, at 5 o'clock, and there she was giving a talk at 5 o'clock in the morning. So we speed over to Dallas from Fort Worth, and to get there at 7 o'clock, and nobody's supposed to know Mother is coming. Well, the church was packed. And it was Hispanic and Black community, African-American community. So we get there, and I didn't know the way, to be honest, from Fort Worth. And I was speeding, hoping the police would catch me. No policeman in sight. And I finally recognized a sign on the freeway, and then I followed that sign, and I got to the church in Dallas. So again, very, very simple woman. And after the Mass, she sits in the back. No matter where she is, she goes and sits way in the back. And I said, Mother, I think they want you to sit in the front. They're probably going to call on you to talk, which they did. So she sits up there. But after Mass, she goes out and she mixes among the people, the poor. And that's always her life, and the other people wanted to meet her. But that's where she was among the people, a very wonderful woman. So simple that I think that's what would attracted people to her. You would have never known she had done all the things in the world she had done. And by that time, I think she had won the Nobel Peace Prize, because that was a few years later, about 10 years later, when she came to Dallas. I think that's about it for the Mother Teresa. Oh, I do keep up with her sisters. Since the house we found it was I didn't find, but I helped with the sisters and take them places, try to teach them to understand American ways. But the interesting thing about her sisters, they were much friendlier with the lady who brought them there than with me. And they told me at first that American religious, they were told to stay away from them because we were very different. We didn't accept Rome. Well, somebody had told them that erroneously, so it took them a while to really warm up to me and to talk with me. But then once they knew me, they became friendly, and they began to ask me to help them with different things too. So that was quite interesting. But I brought them food every weekend. The lady got food. We cooked for them. We did parties with them. They took care of, Dallas has a lot to do. They take care of abused women. They keep them in the house with babies. They feed the hungry. They give out food every week to the poor. They teach. They are tremendously busy, very busy. They have so much work to do. And they say, one sister told me, she said, I've never been in a house that's so busy. She said, we are called day and night. So they're doing marvelous work. Then they still are. I keep up with them every time I go to Dallas. I visit the sisters. I visit them here in Lafayette. When I go to Europe or any place I go where they are, I go visit them. And almost always there's a sister I know there because they're changed pretty frequently, and they all remember me from Dallas because I worked with them for about 25 years. As long as they were there, I worked with them, and I still go back and forth. Sometimes they even call me from Dallas about where to get Christmas trees and who is the person who gives them to them. So we still keep up, and we still work with them. Every time I go, I visit them. So it's been a wonderful meeting. And then the assistant to Mother Teresa, her name was Sister Frederick. She's still alive. She's 105 years old. When I went to Rome for Mother's canonization, Sister Frederick was 100 years old in 2016. And she remembered Dallas so well. That was one of the houses she founded and loved Dallas. So it was really good. It still is good keeping up with the sisters. They're wonderful sisters. And they work very, very hard. Well, I think that my really favorite part of Scripture is a psalm, and it's a psalm about God making us. Before I was formed in my mother's womb, He knew all about me. I love that because it shows how completely God knows us. I think human nature remains the same. It has not changed. I think young people need to be challenged, and we're not challenging them today. I think they're giving in, parents give in to them, teachers give in to them. You know, people seem to be almost afraid of young people today, and they don't want to tell them anything. You know, we have so much about freedom in America, yet young people love discipline. I know people won't accept what I'm saying, but having taught in high school, and I was a strict principal, many of the children came back and told me they didn't think they'd ever come back and tell me this, but they loved the discipline. And they said, you know, you were the only person who told us you were going to do something if we didn't do this, and you really stuck to it. Nobody else did. But human nature remains the same. They love a challenge, but I don't think there are enough challenges for our young people. And then, of course, the whole system in education has changed. I think we've lost a lot in education, religious teaching. Even in the public schools, they used to talk about ethics and morals, and that doesn't happen today. I think our young people are distracted. I think they have good hearts, but they're just not taking the time to reflect about a vocation. Now, I know that God can touch hearts in different ways, and maybe it's a time in our history that we're going to just suffer this way for a while, but I think it'll come back. I think now some of the young people want traditional ways of living. They want more structure, even in religious life. They want to go back to the habit. So many of them do. We haven't seen that explosion in the South yet, but I think in the Northeast there has been. The third world countries are getting vocations, and then they're coming over here to help us. We used to be missionaries to their countries, and now they're missionaries to ours. So I don't know where we're going, but I think God's going to come through. His ways are not our ways. So I think there's got to be hope, and that we never give up.